സുഹൃത്തുക്കളെ, ഇത് വളരെ ശ്രദ്ധയോടെ കേൾക്കണം. മോദിക്ക് അസാധ്യമായി ഒന്നുമില്ല എന്നാണ് മഹാരാഷ്ട്ര ഇലക്ഷൻ റിസൾട്ട് തെളിയിക്കുന്നത്. നല്ല കാര്യങ്ങൾ ചെയ്യുന്നത് സാധ്യമാണ് എന്നല്ല ഞാൻ പറഞ്ഞത്. മഹാരാഷ്ട്ര ഇലക്ഷനിൽ ഔദ്യോഗികമായി പോളിംഗ് സമയം അവസാനിക്കുന്ന 5 മണിക്ക് 58.22% പേർ വോട്ട് ചെയ്തു എന്നാണ് ഇലക്ഷൻ കമ്മീഷന്റെ ഔദ്യോഗിക രേഖ കാണിക്കുന്നത്. എന്നാൽ അന്ന് രാത്രി 11:30 ഇലക്ഷൻ കമ്മീഷൻ പുറത്തുവിട്ട പോളിംഗ് പെർസെൻറ്റേജ് 65.02 ആണ്. വോട്ടെണ്ണുന്നതിന് മുൻപ് അത് വീണ്ടും 66.05% വർദ്ധിച്ചു. അതായത് ഏതാണ്ട് 8% പെർസെന്റിന്റെ വർധനവ്. ഇത് അസാധ്യമാണ്. മാത്തമാറ്റിക്കലി ഇത് പോസിബിൾ അല്ല. 76 ലക്ഷത്തോളം അഡീഷണൽ ആളുകൾ 5 മണിക്ക് ശേഷം വോട്ട് ചെയ്യുക എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ 100% അസാധ്യമാണ്. ഇത് വ്യക്തമാക്കിക്കൊണ്ട് ധനമന്ത്രി നിർമ്മല സീതാരാമന്റെ ഭർത്താവ് പരകാല പ്രഭാകർ ദ വയറിന്റെ കരൺ ഥാപ്പറുമായി സംസാരിക്കുന്നത് വളരെ ശ്രദ്ധയോടെ കേൾക്കേണ്ടതാണ്. ഈ വീഡിയോ ഇംഗ്ലീഷിൽ ആയതിനാൽ മലയാളത്തിലേക്ക് ട്രാൻസ്ലേറ്റ് ചെയ്യുന്നില്ല. മലയാളം സബ് ടൈറ്റിലോടെ കാണേണ്ടവർക്ക് വീഡിയോയുടെ അടിയിലുള്ള CC ക്ലിക്ക് ചെയ്യുക. അപ്പോൾ ഓട്ടോമാറ്റിക് ഇംഗ്ലീഷ് സബ് ടൈറ്റിൽ വരും. എന്നിട്ട് സെറ്റിംഗ്സ് ക്ലിക്ക് ചെയ്ത് സബ് ടൈറ്റിൽ CC ക്ലിക്ക് ചെയ്യുക. എന്നിട്ട് ഓട്ടോ ട്രാൻസ്ലേറ്റ് ക്ലിക്ക് ചെയ്യുക. അപ്പോൾ വരുന്ന ഡ്രോപ്പ് ഡൗൺ മെനുവിൽ നിന്ന് മലയാളമോ നിങ്ങൾക്ക് ആവശ്യമുള്ള മറ്റ് ഏത് ലാംഗ്വേജോ സെലക്ട് ചെയ്താൽ ആ ലാംഗ്വേജിൽ സബ് ടൈറ്റിൽ ഡിസ്പ്ലേ ചെയ്യുന്നതാണ്.
And why is it that if it's a very small number of people who are the additional voters, the opposition India bloc wins? That cries out for an explanation, doesn't it?
It does. You know, Karan, I want to trust the Election Commission because it's a constitutional body. Although the appointments, if you see after the amendments, etc., they don't give you much confidence still. But then Election Commission will have to give me a solid reason for me to be able to defend Election Commission. Now, if this is the kind of discrepancy from 5 o'clock to 11:30, again before counting, if these are the things, if they are not properly explained, how do I have confidence in the integrity of the election process, my democratic process?
The well-known economist and current affairs commentator Parakala Prabhakar has spotted a mystifying, inexplicable and disconcerting discrepancy in the official turnout figures put out by the Election Commission for Maharashtra. It seems between close of polls and the final tally, the turnout increased by nearly 8%. That didn't happen in Jharkhand, where it increased by less than 2% and 1% on the 2 days of polling. Now, Maharashtra, as you know, was won by the NDA and Jharkhand by the India bloc. So today we ask, how do we explain this unprecedented increase in the Maharashtra turnout? Dr. Parakala is not suggesting that this is because of EVMs or ballot tampering, nor is he saying this is the reason for the NDA's victory. But that doesn't mean this massive discrepancy doesn't need to be explained. Joining me now is the well-known economist, current affairs commentator, and Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman's husband, Parakala Prabhakar. Let's start with Maharashtra. I'll come to Jharkhand after that. At 5 p.m. on the 20th, the turnout in Maharashtra was deemed to be 58.22%. By 11:30 p.m. on the same day, it had increased to 65.02%. Before counting on the 23rd, it had gone up yet again to 66.05%. This means that the turnout increased by 7.83%. That's such an astonishing figure. I'm going to repeat it for the audience, that the turnout increased between 5 p.m. and 11:30 p.m. by an astonishing 7.83%. That's such a huge increase in terms of the number of people. Can you start by estimating for me how many people that would actually be?
Karan, from 5 p.m. to 11:30 p.m. 5 p.m. there was a figure of 58.22. And 58.22, the gross number would be 5,64,88,024. By 11:30 p.m., that percentage has gone up to 65.02, which gross figure would be 6,30,85,732. Between 5 p.m. and 11:30 p.m., the total hike in gross number is 65,97,708. In other words, about 66 lakhs. But the hike doesn't end there. Just a few hours before the counting, again, there was an increase of 9,99,359. That's almost about 10 lakhs. All put together from 5 o'clock on the 20th to 11:30 p.m. on the 20th, and a few hours, 12 hours before counting, the total increase was 75 lakhs 97,067. That's about 76 lakhs.
That is such an astonishing figure that it bears underlining for the sake of the audience. What the Election Commission is asking us to believe is that between the formal close of polls at 5 p.m. on the 20th and the last voting that happened at 11:30 p.m. on the 20th night, an additional almost 76 lakh people voted. That is such a difficult figure for most people to believe. They would turn around and say it's unbelievable. Isn't it very hard to swallow?
Yes. If you look at the historical data, Karan, never ever we had, see, Election Commission announces a provisional figure at 5 o'clock. But then the final count is given a few hours later, because there may be people who are waiting on the premises and they're all allowed to vote. After that is also done, finally in the night, they give you the final figure. Historically, the discrepancy or the difference between the provisional figure and the final figure has never ever crossed 1%. It has always been under 1%. Now, today we are in a situation where between the provisional figure and the final figure, it is 7.83%. Gross figure is about 76 lakh votes.
Let's take up the point you made that after polls officially close at 5 p.m., if there are still people waiting on the premises or in the compound, they are permitted to vote because they arrived there before polls closed. Let's, for argument's sake, purely for argument's sake, assume that there were 1,000 people waiting in the compound to vote. Each of them arrived before 5 p.m., so each of them would have a right to vote. Now, let's assume that it takes 1 minute per person to vote. Actually, it takes a lot longer. It takes around 4 or 5 at least. But let's, for argument's sake, assume it takes 1 minute per person to vote. That means those 1,000 people waiting to vote would take 1,000 minutes to do so. And 1,000 minutes is 16.6 hours. But the problem is that between 5 p.m. and 11:30 p.m., there's only 6.5 hours. So even in the 6.5 hours available for extra voting, that 1,000 simply could never have voted. And if the 1,000 could never have voted, how on earth could 76 lakh have done so? So my question is a simple one. How is this huge increase of nearly 8% to be accounted for? Does the Election Commission give any explanation, or are they silent?
Karan, there is one more impossibility here. You know, a booth across India on an average has about 1,000 and 1,200 votes, between 1,000 and 1,200 votes. If after polls closed, if 1,000 people voted, as you said, 16 hours it takes. If that is the case, does it mean that throughout the day nobody voted? But the Election Commission says that 58.22% have voted. That's one. The second thing is the Election Commission's own manual says that, people who have entered the premises, and the doors will have to be closed, the gate will have to be closed, and the last person waiting will be given a slip bearing number 1. And the closest person to the booth is given the last number. So that, there are no more additions after the gates are closed, just to take it. And the whole process will have to be videographed. And all these slips will have to be deposited. Now, when people like us ask, where is the videograph? Election Commission doesn't say anything. Election Commission doesn't give you any explanation. Not only here, even during Lok Sabha elections, we found a lot of discrepancies, but no answer is forthcoming from the Election Commission.
You're making a very good point, Dr. Parakala. In addition to my point that it's almost impossible if there were 1,000 people waiting to vote for them to have voted because there simply wasn't time for them to do so. But you're making an additional point on top of that, which is if there were such a large number of people waiting to vote, it means that in many constituencies, people wouldn't have voted at all because the constituencies simply do not have so many people to vote per booth. Both points vitiate the claim that 7.83% voted after the polls closed at 5 o'clock and before 11:30 p.m.